We've got Ray Galton and Alan Simpson with us here in the studio. Could not be happier. They are the co-creators of a couple of the greatest comedy series this country's ever produced. Fellas, thanks for coming in.
Oh, great pleasure. Nice to be here.
I'm surprised to be here at this time in the morning.
Are you surprised? You're not an early riser?
No. Late sleeper.
Now, I just want to establish you're not a couple, are you?
I mean, how do you mean?
Well, you're not together as a couple. You're not.
No, not anymore. No.
That would have been lovely, though, wouldn't it?
A lot of people thought we were when we first. They said when we started, we used to spend all the hours that God sent together.
Yeah, I bet.
We used to sometimes work 36 hours non-stop, and then when anybody ever saw us at the BBC, we were together.
Yeah.
And words were said.
Well, because back then, I suppose, it wouldn't have been as open and as okay as it is today, so you would have been...
We still keep quiet about it.
Yeah.
And I used to say the same thing about Frank Muir and Dennis Norden, so we were an exalted company. You know.
But these are great names here. You think about these guys all working at the BBC. I mean, it must have... Do you look back on that period as a kind of a golden period in your lives, or are you not the kind of guys to spend that sort of time in reflection?
Well, I mean, it was our most productive time. From the early 50s to the 70s.
Yeah.
There was a lot going on. One tends to think of your own output and not so much of other people's.
Of course.
But we did meet fantastic people in the BBC Club, which was the best pub in London at the time. And it was a wonderful meeting place for different writers and different producers, different directors, and so that was because writers don't mix very well, except in pubs and bars.
Yeah. I know they do. They like to be loosened up.
Oh, indeed. Any time, because in those days we spent most of the time in the office. We were writing about 40 shows a year. Wow. I mean, you couldn't do that these days.
And you guys wrote, but essentially you wrote them all together on your own. You didn't have other people didn't come in and ghost.
Just the two of us.
It was down to us, all blame and all the fame.
Hancock, of course, was is the show that you were best known for.
Yeah, and well, that was what started us off, really.
Yeah.
I mean, that was back in the 50s. We were young, acne-covered, vapid young men, and working all the hours in my mother's. We started in my mother's front room, and then the
rent got too high.
The rent got too high, so we moved in with Spike Milligan and Eric Sykes.
Wow!
And that's where all the early stuff was done. And of course later with Steptoe we became more mature.
Of course,
as you see.
And you moved into his mother's front room. What did you prefer working for radio, writing for radio, or TV? What's your preference?
Well, we were told by Eric Sykes and Spike. Well, Eric mainly, because Spike hadn't done too much TV, but to remind us that when we made the transition from radio to television, that we had to remember it was a visual, and like you don't say, drop that bucket or put that bucket down. You put the bucket down without saying it's a bucket.
Yeah.
But we just carried on as usual. We wrote as many words and let them get on with the visual. Really.
We used to have them just sitting together talking.
But it must have been, I would have thought, for the performers,
talking heads,
maybe a huge leap then. I mean, you think about, you had the Hancock radio show, and you had most of the cast transferred straight over, I believe, didn't they? You had
except Tony and Sid, and Bill Kerr and Hattie Jacobs and Kenneth Williams didn't go with it on television.
Why did Hattie and Kenneth not?
Well, because we thought that we wouldn't be able to get there'd be too much on television to have too many people. On radio, you can get away. Time sort of gets squeezed in. It was on television. It's a bit different. So we thought
people around the microphone.
Too cluttered.
People around a microphone on a radio show doesn't notice, and they just come in for one line and out. It can't do that on
it clutters the screen up. But you're talking about four there. We just mentioned four of the greatest comedy actors this country's ever produced. You've got Hattie Jacobs, who was fabulous and very much underrated, I feel.
Yeah.
Kenneth Williams, who I think is held in the esteem he deserves. Sid James and Tony Hancock.
Absolutely.
Were these exceptional people, or do you think there was just more talent of that sort around back then?
Well, they certainly weren't radio people. I mean, Sid James was shaking like a leaf when he came in to do the shows. He had his Trilby hat pulled down over his down as far as his nose. You couldn't see him. The audience couldn't see him, and the paper was making noises. They had to turn it, but he gradually got used to it. Kenneth hadn't done very much radio, if at all. He was playing the Dauphin when Dennis
Sure,
Van Wilson found him.
Yeah.
So they became very adept at mastering the technique of radio. Yeah.
The read-throughs in those days were wonderful, because that was the first time we ever seen a script on the radio show. Was on the first read-through.
Right.
Now, with Hancock, Sid James, Kenneth Williams and Bill Kerr, you had 4 of the biggest, loudest laughers in the business. And if anything tickled their fancy, all 4 of them would suddenly break into these enormous guffaws, and Hancock would literally be rolling around the floor holding his sides, and you'd sit there, you think, yeah, we did that.
That must have been great.
Smirking, you know.
On the downside, would there be moments when lines were greeted with a deathly silence that you'd hope might have had that effect?
Well, I mean, you got the famous Williams diaries, which still totally perplexing, because Ken used to come into the show, fall about laughing all through the script. Tell these stories and entertain everybody, and giving the impression he was having a wonderful time. And 20 years later, we found out that he used to go home and write these vitriolic entries in his diary about rubbish scripts and rotten actors he has to work with. And then next Sunday, he's back and hello, and off we go again, laugh.
You never know.
What incredible.
I'm dreading Andy's diaries coming out.
Oh, indeed,
I'm not looking for one of those at all.
Indeed.
A lot of your work is available again now. I mean,
I'm glad you brought that
up. The BBC have gone back and they've got obviously an incredibly rich library of work that they can dip into.
Nice, yeah.
Much of which is yours. Yeah, I hope you're incredibly rich. Hancock's Half Hour, the radio series, is coming out on. It's been coming out for a while now on CD box sets.
That's right. It's at number 5, I believe.
Very lavish, very beautifully produced.
Very tasteful, isn't it?
Yeah.
This is very upmarket.
It's very elegant, isn't it? Yeah.
And Hancock, of course, is very cherished and remembered. And loved, I think, still today, even by those who are aware of the shows. But I would like to see him repeated. I'd like to see him back on BBC Two, maybe later tonight, because I think there's a generation who aren't aware. Yeah, the TV show, radio show. Yeah. You know, you can get it in this form, and it's still there for you.
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
Do you think it's we're not seeing because the colour is they're black and white? You know?
I think it's possibly the colour.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, but then Bill Coe is
yeah, so they put Bill Coe on late at night.
Although that's much better written as well. I mean,
well, I mean, there you go.
Well, it's American, isn't it?
There.
It's American.
Yeah, Nat Hiken, I think it was, wasn't it? Is that right?
No, he was the creator, and then Neil Simon, Doc Simon,
wow,
Woody Allen. He used to write.
See, they're writers. You know what I mean? They really
absolutely
know.
Not like us pretenders.
Chancers, really. Let's have some music, and we'll chat some more about Hancock's Half Hour and Steptoe and Son after this.
We may be back.
This is Jonathan Ross here with Andy Davis, and we've got Galton and Simpson. That's Ryan Allen, to their friends and family, no doubt. I'm sure people do this all the time. I have several favourite Hancock episodes that I think of surprisingly often. But in particular, the one that I always loved and admired, and I used to have the script of this and read it, was the episode where I believe you set yourself the challenge, I imagine that's what it was, of just him. It was just Hancock in the room alone.
That was the very first television show after he split with Sid James. Yeah, we did. He said, we agreed with him really, because it was becoming a bit of a double act, and they weren't Laurel and Hardy and Morecambe was. They were individual acts. I mean, Sid used to do about 10 films a year.
Yeah,
he had a career outside, whereas Tony, and it was getting to the stage where Tony walked down the street and said, "Hello, where's Sid?" And so Tony decided that if he was going to carry on, he should be on his own. So Ray and I really agreed with that. So we thought, well, if he wants to be on his own, we'll make him on his own. So we wrote this script. Well, he was entirely on his own.
It was quite a deliberate act, on our part. We thought, right, you want to be on your own, you bagger, you will be.
So I remember we took it up to Shrewsbury, and he was playing in Shrewsbury at the time. We went all the way up to Shrewsbury and took this script into him, all on his own, because he loved it, you see, because it was...
Well, actors
exactly what he wanted.
You show me an actor who wouldn't like being given a script. It's all you this week, darling.
Absolutely, absolutely. And and he loved it, and he did it well. But that was it was a challenge, and he did it very well. So
one of the things I love about those scripts and the period generally is they're very locked in time. The reference points, you have the cultural reference points and the historical reference points are very much of the moment.
Yeah. So
you have, and which is the milieu you guys were working in and living in, I suppose. But he often seemed to fantasise about beatnik women. And loose women generally seem to be of the beatnik variety back then.
Yeah, well, he fancied himself as a bit of an intellectual, you see, so that was, I mean, we did one where he decided it's about time he got married in order to, keep the genes going, keep the line going. And he wasn't quite sure what sort of woman he should want, so he advertised, and he took out 3 totally different types of women. He took out the beatnik, the intellectual, and the bird, the bit of Totty,
the Dolly bird, yeah.
And we did 3 little sketches of him, and of course all 3 of them finished up disastrously. And he threw them all out, and then I think in the end of it, they all decided they all wanted him, and they all came back and fighting over themselves, and he was trying to get them out. But that was typical of him fantasising about the sort of bird he fancied.
I don't think you could have got Hancock playing to what we'd call a normal woman, a normal girl. I mean, it had to be rather bizarre in order for him to relate. They couldn't, as an actor. He couldn't get on with a normal person.
Couldn't play a straight love scene. No.
Were there actually beatnik women walking around London?
Some coffee bar stuff.
Absolutely.
So the black tights, the heavy black makeup,
the blue fingernails didn't start with your generation.
I think London in the 50s must have been a tremendously exciting place.
Well, we didn't see much of it. We were in the office working. We missed the swing 60s. Totally.
Yeah, see, there weren't any.
We heard about it.
You just imagined it, and you probably saw one, and that was good enough.
That's right. Yes, it was the wife.
You're the first person I've heard of say anything nice about the 50s. Everybody thinks it's the dullest black and white time. That's my grandson says. It's black and white time, isn't it? But no, I haven't yet to meet someone say, the 60s, 50s, that was a good time.
Well, it's strange, because I get the feeling the 50s was a more exciting time than the 60s, insofar as the 60s...
Well, we had the Festival of Britain, yeah.
well, there was an explosion in the 60s, I guess, a cultural explosion, but in the 50s I like the fact that it was rumbling under, and that you had this kind of... And it was there was a kind of a sort of an intellectual purpose to it as well. As the 60s, it became more, I think, based on hedonism and very simple, broad stroke ideas.
Oh, very, very, very right. I mean, the 50s were certainly a decade of hope, for the future, and all the things will be done by the Labour governments and everything else like that. But weren't. But I mean, nothing was fulfilled. But it was a time of hope and change and serious politics, very serious politics, and very serious intellectualism.
I think it was the last grown-up decade we actually had.
Well, then you get the 60s started, you see, and the pill came out, and everybody thought they could, we thought, hello, it's arrived at last, all that I've heard about.
We're back to the ladies again. Here we go.
Absolutely, yeah.
And it wasn't only the beatnik girls.
So I'm told. We were in the office, as I say, working too hard. But we heard about it.
Hancock himself, I mean, he was by the public when that show was at its peak and at its most successful. He was, I would have thought, probably the most loved entertainer in the country, wasn't he?
I think the radio show was probably at the time was the top show. Yeah.
What kind of audience did you have for that show?
I think with Hancock it never got much above 20 million,
No, you see.
Because Steptoe got up to 28.5 million. That was 28.5 million.
And there were only 29 million people in the country.
Absolutely. I mean,
that was before the illegal immigrants, of course.
And what the other 500 were doing, I don't know. I mean, they probably
incredible success.
They were putting it on.
Why did you guys move on? I know you've spoken this before, but why did you move on from Hancock to Steptoe and Son? Was that because Tony himself had become so difficult?
Well, no, not really. No, that wasn't. But the problem was over the film script. We'd written the first film for him called The Rebel.
Yeah, which I love.
Which was I mean, it's become a bit of a cult movie amongst artists. Would you believe? Yeah. We just had in London, in Hoxton. They just had a society called the Pataphysical Society, but based on the French. The French mob in Paris, and they say it's
Jarret, people like that,
And they just had a retrospective of the paintings that Hancock was purported to have done in The Rebel.
Do they exist?
One exists. His
belongs
self-portrait exists.
But the rest were painted by the members of the Pataphysical Institute.
And they had this
and I think they're going to put the Aphrodite at the waterhole. Someone's going to cast it in bronze.
But they took it very seriously. They had some wonderful reviews of it, which could have been Brian Sewell. I mean, all this artistic stuff about this crap. The foot and the terrible... Anyway, they had this exhibition, and it was packed.
It says more about art today, though, than it does the stuff you were doing for comedy back then.
Well, I think Lucian Freud said it was his favourite film on modern art, but there's talk about making doing a remake of this film with new people, but it'd be hard to differentiate between the rubbish and
You
The
see?
good stuff. It's harder.
But that's the older man talking there.
Yeah,
That's the voice from the 50s there. So it's rubbish. It's modern rubbish. Let's talk about Steptoe and Son when we come back. We'll have another record because Steptoe and Son is, after Hancock, probably my favourite television comedy. Oh, actually, we're going to get the news first.
Yeah,
Should we
we've
go
got the
now?
news.
We'll go the news. Can you guys hang around?
Yeah.
Okay,
No problem.
88 to 91 FM. This is Radio 2 from the BBC. The Manic Street Preachers there, and James Taylor Bradfield is it James Taylor Bradfield? What's his
Taylor Bradfield.
James Dean Bradfield. He's on the show. Well, it could have been.
It could have been James.
He's on the show later on. We've got Galton and Simpson. Ray Galton and Alan Simpson. Do you guys, when you say Galton, you feel like saying Simpson afterwards? It's so that's the way it trips off the tongue.
Funny enough, quite often in early press reports, such as they were, we quite often were called Galt and Simpson because of that. The "un" got swallowed in the "and." Galt and Simpson, so it was the Galt and Simpson.
Yeah. Let's talk about Steptoe and Son, because Steptoe and Son was what you followed Hancock's half hour with.
That's right, yeah.
Of course. And I believe Tony Hancock was quite disparaging when he heard that you were going on to write this show about essentially,
Yeah, where did you hear that from?
I read a quote when he was in Australia and someone said to him,
Really?
What do you think? And he said, I don't know, they're going to have to write something about a tramp on a...
Well,
something.
this must be hearsay because the Steptoe came out of the Comedy Playhouse, that's the thing we wrote after we split with Hancock.
Yeah.
We wanted to write a series of Frankie Howard, but Tom Sloan, who was the head of the variety at BBC, said no, he's finished. Yeah, it's one of Frank's bad periods,
Yeah.
He was up next week, but we can't do that. He said what we want you to do is to write this Comedy Playhouse. He said that's my title, and that's the only thing I want to keep in it. And I've got 10 slots and half-hour slots, and you can do what you like. You can write it, direct it, produce it, be in it, do what you like. And we couldn't say no to that because it's never been offered before.
Great offer, yeah.
Anyway, out about number 4, was it number 4?
Yeah, number 4. Yeah.
We were writing a script. It wasn't called Steptoe and Son. We just called it The Offer, as it turned out. And we write about these 2 rag and bone men. We didn't know whether we would make them father or son or whatever, what relationship. It wasn't until we were quite a long way through that we decided on the father and the son relationship. But it was only called the Offer, and that was only we resisted making a series for 6 months on that. Because pressure was put on us.
And was it a big hit, the first one, when it went out as part of the Comedy Playhouse?
The first series ran six weeks, and apparently by number 6 it was such a big hit that the BBC did an unprecedented imaginative thing of repeating it immediately.
Wow.
So the following week they started with number 1 again. So in other words, we got a 12-week run out of it.
Wow.
And Harry Corbett, Ray had rented a villa down in the south of Spain. We were going to write a film down there. And Harry came out to join us. He said, "There's bedlam back there." He said, "I can't walk out of the house." He said, "It's incredible." He'd never experienced this. But the sad thing about it was on the second series of Steptoe, they opened, the BBC put it out against Hancock's new ITV series.
Yeah.
And it wasn't out. I think we went from 8 to 8:30, and then Hancock was on 8:30 to 9.
Right.
And of course the papers got picked up this sort of story of us against Hancock.
Yeah.
Who would survive? Would it be us without him, or him without us?
And Tony got clobbered. The Tony show got clobbered, and Steptoe was sort of praised to the skies. But we met Tony the next week, and he just congratulated us. He said, saw the show, said, great show, well done.
That's
so
nice.
So that's why it was surprising to hear that the.
Oh, well, maybe. Well, I had read that quote.
He was very generous in that respect, Tony.
Well, yeah, I'm interested that you didn't know they were initially father and son, because it strikes one now
That's
that
right.
what a lot of the success of it is because of this kind of
absolutely.
remarkable relationship between the 2 men in Steptoe and Son.
Well, what happened was it was a last-minute thing. We hadn't got any idea. We were up against the deadline. Ray said 2 rag and bone men, and we had no time. So we started writing without knowing who they were.
Yeah.
And we just put first rag and bone man, second rag and bone man. And we wrote 10 pages of these 2 blokes arguing, having a row.
They could have been friends.
Could have been anybody. Yeah. And we halfway through, I said to Ray, look, he said, where are we going with this? What's the story? Who are they? We've got to think of how it's going to end. So we read back over what we'd written, and it was obvious that one of them was older than the other one.
Yeah.
And one of them was healthy and the other one wasn't. So we said, right, who are they? Older brother, younger brother, cousins, and then suddenly one of us said father and son, and that was it.
Yeah.
That was the curve.
Wow.
And when we realised that the son was 37, 38, that gave it another angle,
Yeah.
Of being a man being trapped with his father. It's usually women, isn't it? It's usually
Yeah,
he spends the women trapped with their some geezer he said, you realise it's very Strindbergian, isn't it? I said,
Well, there are episodes which are just heartbreaking. I mean, and the end, the resolution of some of them, where you know that they're never going to be apart.
Well, that's right.
You know, he doesn't have a life with. Well, neither of them have.
And
a
because
life
once
without
we've
the
got
other.
that, once we realised that, I mean, it gave us a lovely unmined seam sort of thing. We could have.
I have a favourite episode as well. I have several favourite Steptoe and Son episodes, but I love the one where they decide as they often did, they could not bear to live together anymore. But of course, they couldn't be apart for any number of reasons. This time being financial, I think. So they divide the house with odd barriers and boards and doors directly, completely in half, with a turnstile, I believe, to get into the kitchen.
That's right. Well, Ray will tell you about that.
Well, I don't. I will now. But no. But joining on from what you were just saying about the turnstiles now, the barrier came right down across their dining table and the television set. Right there. And my favourite line was because the old man had changed the programme halfway through, and Harry said, "I've got right on my side." No, I said, "Yeah, but I've got the knobs on my side."
But the idea, when I was getting a rotor, the idea Ray came up and he said his brother had told him.
My brother was in the Merchant Navy, and he married a girl from Copenhagen, and this has nothing to do with the story. He was just telling me once years before that Carlsberg, the father and son who owned Carlsberg, they had a tremendous row and difference of opinion about how the place should be run, and they hated each other so much they built a wall right through the factory.
Wow!
And they used to
start.
Yeah, absolutely. That's where we got the idea for the Steptoe.
That's how we got the idea.
And we just took it to its furthest limits. We divided everything up. Yeah.
You can buy, I think, I guess they just keep them on the shelves most of the time. Hancock's Half Hour, the collector's edition, is out in CD. They're up to Series 5 now, and it has all the different radio ones. I think you can get some of them on tape as well. And Steptoe and Son, there's a book called Steptoe and Son, which is written by Ray and Alan with Robert Ross, who's a...
Robert wrote it.
Robert Ross wrote it.
Yeah, we didn't write it.
With extensive interviews. Well, you can't, if you read it, the bits where it says, and then another brilliant episode was written. We can't say that.
I thought they were the lines you'd
It's
put in.
It's very un-British.
That was your contribution.
No, we got Robert Ross in and told him that he could write that.
I'm gonna chuck you out in a minute because we've got a competition to do. Before we do,
I've got to go and watch a football match.
I don't think you've got anywhere to go.
I'm going home to sleep.
I can see you're busy.
I'm going to watch Hampton play Cheshire United.
I could sleep once during now. I'll come with you.
At least 250 people.
That sounds like a tragic way to spend your
251. I shall come with you and have a good sleep.
But haven't you forgotten the DVD, incidentally?
Is there a DVD?
The Steptoe's also out on DVD.
I didn't know that. Well, you see, we would give that away, but I'm taking it.
I'm taking it home.
I mean, why do you think we came in here? I mean,
I thought you were just on the way to the football match, and you thought you'd stop off for some coffee.
A little Hampton via the BB Broadcasting House.
But before you go, what do you think of comedy today? What do you think of the state of British comedy on television as we speak?
Some great stuff out.
What do you like in particular?
I like The Office, which is fantastic.
I think that's absolutely superb. And I mean, there's some very, very good talent. I mean, the Paul Whitehouse, the Ricky Gervais.
I think we're going through a new kind of golden age now.
Steve Coogan.
I listen to radio a lot, and the Now Show last night, it was very funny, I mean, Punt and Dennis, I think was super, really good.
And also the idea of a golden age was there was
a load of rubbish on there.
There was a lot of rubbish in those days. You only remember the stuff that's lasted.
There was probably more rubbish on there, in fact.
Fool's gold, it was. Fool's gold.
Really lovely to meet you both properly. I know I've bumped into you before, but really lovely to meet you both properly. The Hancock stuff, of course, we adore. Steptoe and Son, and I'm looking forward to, I believe you're now writing a new series. This is exciting news for S Club 7. So we'll look forward to that. It's going to be the S Club Juniors you work for. I hope the match goes well for you today.
I hope so too.
I feel it's doomed to failure.
You realise you've just lost a lot of fans in Chesham.
No, we want them to come. The more the merrier. We need the money.
I think they're pragmatic enough to realise that sometimes when the truth is spoken, it's coming from a good place.
I see.
I'm going. I'm not going to sit here listening to this.
Mr. Galton, Mr. Simpson, it's a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Great pleasure for us.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.